Advanced technologies as well as technological edge are defining for the resilience of a state or of an alliance. In this context, the way in which the defense system or the states will manage to implement the new technologies and the armed forces will manage to quickly adapt to the change will determine the military power of the state, but also the ability to face the new emerging threats. And I'm sure that within this context, General Lavigne, as Supreme Allied Commander Transformation, will touch upon this implication, resilience, and technology in more depth. Not only the ACT is very well positioned to drive the transformation of the alliance, but also General Lavigne comes with a great operational and command experience that give him a very authorized voice in speaking about the topic of today's conference. A graduate from the French Air and Space Force Academy, a pilot with operational experience in former Yugoslavia and Iraq, a commander with operational experience in Afghanistan, a strategic planner, a former chief of staff of the French Air and Space Forces, General Lavigne leads the transformation of NATO. And not only that, within this complex task of pushing NATO towards the digital transformation, he continues to play rugby, which says a lot about his resilience. Philippe, it's a pleasure to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Petrescu. Thank you very much, Daniel, for these kind words. It's a pleasure to be here. We were together in Bucharest. In order to talk about, of course, the security context, but also the people, the talents, because it's also the part of the resilience, and that's so important. So, General Petrescu, dear Daniel, Mr. Vice President of the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center, dear Adrian, we met together when we were in Bucharest. Distinguished host and guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much to the Hudson Institute to host this very, very important workshop. So I'm particularly honored to have this opportunity to share with you my vision of the resilience we need in NATO and to update you on the work we are doing in the Alliance in general and at the Allied Command Transformation Norfolk in particular. To put in a nutshell, I would say that although resilience is not a discovery in itself, the recent crisis have caused a real breakthrough that has redefined the notion of resilience, especially due to the immense possibilities opened up by the use of emerging disruptive technologies. Which leads me to say that tomorrow there will be, on one hand, those who have succeeded in their digital transformation and who will therefore be resilient, among other things, and on the other hand, those who have not. Resilience is not a new concept. In fact, it is in NATO's DNA. The Washington Treaty contains numerous mutual assistance and solidarity clauses, the most famous of which being Article 5. For almost 75 years now, the Allies have been committed to self-support and mutual assistance to withstand armed attack. We can say that resilience has always been a cornerstone of collective defense. And it still is. In 2021, recognizing the changing nature of war and the increasingly persistent, simultaneous and boundless threats NATO faces in this fragmented world of pervasive competition, Allied Command Transformation endorsed a new strategic document, the NATO Warfighting Capstone Concept, to be both the North Star and the compass for NATO's warfare development over the next 20 years. Inside, a thorough analysis of the implication for future warfighting supports the derivation of five warfighting development imperatives to organize and synchronize alliance warfighting development efforts. Among these five WDIs, warfighting development imperatives, layered resilience is defined as the ability to absorb shocks and fight across all echelons: military, civil military, and military civil. Last year, in 2022, NATO adopts in Madrid its latest strategic concept, which also recognizes this resilience as an essential enabler of the alliance core missions. Earlier this year, in January, NATO and EU signed the third NATO-EU joint declaration, developing further our strategic partnership in a number of areas including resilience and critical infrastructure protection. And Finland's membership on April 4th is a great step forward for the resilience of the entire alliance. With Sweden soon to follow, they are bringing great knowledge, expertise and experience in this matter. Our commitment to protecting our citizens and defending our territory remains steadfast, even more since Russia decided to launch this war of aggression against Ukraine. The war in Ukraine has been a defining moment for NATO, refocusing on the need to strengthen not only NATO and national military instrument of power, but also the civilian and the civil-military interface, which also reinforces our resilience collectively. When President Putin first ordered his tanks to roll across the border, he expected Kyiv to fall within days and the rest of the country to follow in a matter of weeks. He was wrong, because he underestimated the resilience of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Of course, there was this huge international display of solidarity, commensurate with the shock of rupture that the nation felt and the fear that this aggression from another era aroused. But what has allowed Ukraine to embrace and make the most of this solidarity was explain why this country has held up admirably is the intense preparation that has involved the whole Ukrainian society and all levels of the state apparatus, and which now seems to be underpinning at all resilience. Since 2014 and the annexation of Crimea, NATO has helped the country prepare by actively participating in building up the Ukrainian armed forces. But at the same time, the political authorities have undertaken profound reforms that have put Ukraine firmly on the path of digital transformation. As a result, since the beginning of the war, Ukraine has emerged as a leading example of digital innovation and resilience. In the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, which certainly kicked off this movement on a global scale, Ukraine has been particularly quick and eager to use digital capabilities based on cloud technology to perform basic government functions while encouraging innovation and experimentation. When Russia started this war, Ukraine naturally relied on this digital architecture, demonstrating resilience and a strong commitment to continue fostering civilian innovation in the support of military operations. Western countries, most of them NATO allies, supplied Ukraine with advanced weapons and ammunition, and the Western technology sector proved a real game changer. First, because new technologies are inherently a source of resilience. Let me take an example, space. For space is certainly an area where a lot is being done and where more still needs to be done. Modern warfare relies heavily on space, from GPS-guided munitions to communication and intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance. Space is almost everywhere when it comes to high-tech military application. After the Russian invasion in February 22, when Moscow quickly shut down all internet-based services, SpaceX sent Starlink terminals to Ukraine. Since then, the high-speed satellite terminals have become the backbone of digital communication for the Ukrainian military. Starlink's data streams helps bring in drone feeds from across the battlefield, allowing commanders to see enemy forces in real time and coordinate artillery strikes much faster than relaying the same information over radio. This underscores the power of combining private sector innovation with government needs and the increasing interconnectedness of civilian and government space assets. then an attack on dual-use or civil space system would be highly disruptive. The sudden loss of satellite-based positioning, navigation and timing services or satellite communication would paralyze most financial, commercial and transportation systems and related activities. So to have a resilient space support, we need resilience in space, but we also need resilience for the ground segments down to the users. We can send more satellites to densify your network and obtain high precision positioning. We can use laser beam for resilience communication. One could imagine having specific additional capabilities such as responsive launch to quickly rebuild a targeted constellation and so on. But it is the ability to combine resources and fuse data that unlocks the true resilience potential of all of these new and innovative technologies, combining resources and fuse the data. You can predict and prevent natural disasters, as you can deter threats. By integrating traditional space data with data from hyperspectral sensors, through big data analytics, boosted by artificial intelligence and quantum computing, you can spot anomalies that reveal your enemy's camouflage, for example, and gain decisive military advantage to prevent an attack. You also become resilient to jamming by being able to dynamically orchestrate and continuously adjust your communication network as a system of systems, while being confident that your message cannot be intercepted or decrypted thanks to data-centric security, zero trust, and quantum-safe crypto. Space support to military operational is so essential that its resilience has become a critical factor in NATO's deterrence. Resilience in space is achieving transparency, predictability, and accountability. It is therefore essential to exploit all existing synergies between available national systems, both military and commercial, in order to improve the resilience of the space capability provided to the alliance. And what is true in space can be exported to other domains. That's the reason why at ACT and across NATO we seek to achieve digital transformation as quickly as possible, systematically and immediately seizing new opportunities as they emerge. To do this, of course, sharing is paramount. We share best practices by creating communities of military experts. We learn how to better work together through exercise and war games that we make as realistic as possible through modeling and simulation. The process is incremental. Each activity provides valuable insight and helps us fine-tune our responses to different scenarios. These experiments bridge the gap between theory and practice, ensuring that our resilience efforts are practical and effective. By working together across nations at the military level, we benefit from each other's experience. The lessons learned from different nations help us better prepare for and adapt to evolving threats, thereby ensuring our collective resilience. But resilience in NATO goes beyond the military. It requires robust civil-military cooperation, which is central to our overall resilience strategy. This cooperation begins with a strong foundation of trust between the political and military levels. Without trust, our efforts are bound to fail. We must also recognize the need for synergy between what NATO and nations need and what industry can produce. Indeed, the private sector has a critical role to play in enhancing our resilience capabilities. Working with industry leads to innovation and technology that help strengthen our resilience, and data resilience is also essential. It requires the will to share data in a whole-of-government approach, and it demands that nations regain full ownership of data as strategic assets of vital interest. Finally, I want to finish by saying a few words about something that is becoming increasingly important: our cognitive resilience. There has been growing concern about the increasing infiltration or misinformation or fake news into public discourse and public politics in many Western democracies. Through social media and across the World Wide Web, our enemies and adversaries are working hard to influence the minds of NATO population, exploiting our openness to influence the attitude and behavior of our 1 billion citizens. Therefore, it is imperative to develop an effective and robust digital resilience mechanism as part of digital transformation to mitigate the negative impact and vulnerability of individuals and prevent anyone from collecting data from our own emotions. NATO encourages citizens within the alliance to build their own personal resilience to cognitive attack. By awareness of these potential dangers, citizens will take steps to protect themselves from threats and attacks that may arise from the connectedness created by our resilience on technology, our reliance on technology. Ladies and gentlemen, the resilience of a nation, of an alliance, is not only based on the capabilities or training or innovation. It is a whole. It is a whole that requires a change in mindset to embrace agile change, unanimous support from all sectors of society, a realistic partnership between NATO and industry based on adequate production capabilities, integrated civil-military cooperation through communities and forums at all levels, financial and human resources to invest in emerging and disruptive technologies, and to foster these communities of sharing, training, and upscaling. Emerging and disruptive technology play a central role in this mechanism, and they open up new opportunities on their own and even more so when combined. In order to realize these opportunities before our adversaries and competitors, it is essential that we adopt a team spirit and share to understand better, decide faster, and be stronger together. The challenge we face transcends borders and requires a unified response. Resilience is a collective commitment. Resilience is an essential part of our collective defense and contributes to NATO deterrence. With that, I'm ready to answer your question. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, General Lavigne, for your insightful input and for your kind words about EARC. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and with your team in Norfolk. Thank you, General Petrescu, for your comprehensive input about the resilience, especially in the Black Sea. Now we are going forward and we are ready to have 2 questions from the audience here in Bucharest, and then we'll go further with the panels. Thank you very much.
So we will have the first question from Philippe. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. So, my name is Philippe. I'm the president of Political Research Group, one of the partners of organizing this panel. And I'm happy to address my question to the General Lavigne. So it comes back to the technology part in innovation and research effort. And given the technology disparities among partners and the potential to hinder the progress of collaborative projects, what should be the approach to ensure that Diana and me remains at the forefront of the groundbreaking developments in technology and research? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for the question. So I get the word. What should be the approach to remain at the forefront? I must say that, and given that the technology pace is different in our nation, that sometimes it's quite interesting to work on multinational development. I must say that the philosophy of NATO and ACT is to improve interoperability and foster cross-border partnership. So that means that the differences you can see in the beginning of your question is permanently addressed through this requirement, through this philosophy, is interoperability and cross-border partnership. So what should be the approach? I think that we have to say that today, with this refocus on collective defense, there is a huge dynamic, and we have to we have to see this huge dynamic. For example, when you are talking about the NATO Industry Forum and how to keep them at the forefront, I think that the last one, it was in Rome, and it was the first time where we invite a lot of IT, a big part of the IT sector during this NATO Industry Forum. And it was the beginning of this digital transformation. Of course, there were among other defense industry, the big ones, but IT was the first time invited so massively in this forum. The next one will be in Stockholm next month, and it will deal with it will address the new strategic reality together, and it's the title of this NATO. So together. So that's the approach. Of course, we will talk about. We will inform everybody about the decision leader taken in Vilnius, but we will explore the implication of the high-intensity warfare, of course, on the defense industrial base today and tomorrow. We will consider also the governance aspect of capability delivery, because we want to be faster. And of course, we will discuss topic as how to optimize NATO-EU national relationship with industry to deliver a multi-domain enabled alliance. So NIF, NATO Industry Forum, this is the way we are going to keep the NATO Industry Forum in the forefront. Of course, when you are talking about Diana, and Diana is a part of all this innovation world we've got in NATO, and combining the growth of Diana, but also all the innovation that nation has, and we have with the NATO ACT Innovation Hub, a great network. But just to say that the dynamic is so huge for Diana that it's very encouraging to see the 1,200 proposals from entrepreneurs and startups across the nation for the first Diana challenges. 1,200 proposals. That's huge. So so I must say that what should be the approach? Keep the dynamic, keep the energy on innovation, on agility, on experimentation, of course. And talking about exercise and experimentation, I must say that we've got a big exercise ongoing in Portugal, which is Dynamic Messenger. And it's where 27 multi-domain related experimentation involving more than 30 autonomous interoperable assets from 14 nations with 2,000 civilian and military personnel are working on keeping the edge. Keeping the edge, not only on the water, but also under the water, above the water, with space assets also. So it's really multi-domain. And just before the summer break, we had this big exercise, experimentation in Poland, in Bydgoszcz, with this for interoperability, and it was the biggest event. More than 43 countries testing more than 400 capabilities and running 22,000 tests. That's the way that we are going to bring innovation to the warfighter as fast as possible. Over.
Thank you, General. I would like to take the next question from here, from the seat.
Gentlemen, thank you for your introductory remarks. My name is Larry Schutte. I'm a retired federal employee here, a technologist. I'm fascinated by the technology at the kinetic end of warfare, but I sense that the warfighter really thinks about logistics and sustainment. And this conflict over the last year, we've seen quite a bit of the challenges on the supply chains and the disruptions, all the way through the ability to resupply. But I'm curious your thoughts on what's going on in the Black Sea, and then where these emerging technologies that are coming out, autonomous systems and AI, may play a role in improving the resiliency in that environment, in particular for sustainment of the civilian populations, but also the militaries. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you hear us? Yeah. Thank you, Larry, for your question. I tried to explain in several words what is the situation in the Black Sea. Of course, this is only a strategic view. There is a lot of dynamic, not only in the military domain, but in all the other domains, political, social, infrastructure, information, and so on. This dynamic count. I think it's important that NATO and the alliance as a whole has recognized the importance of the Black Sea. We have recognized what the Russians are trying to do there, and we have recognized the fact that we need to be ready for a very long period of time. This means improvements in everything we do. And I think a good thing is that we started to speak very seriously about resilience, and not only speaking about resilience, but we also started to make steps. And I have mentioned some issues we are dealing with, and I have mentioned what we are doing in the Romanian Armed Forces. I think when we speak about resilience there and what we are doing, not only in the kinetic activities, but also in the logistics and everything we have mentioned, this resilience is also connected to our mindset. I mean, in order to be resilient, we need to think and we need to believe in ourselves and be confident that we are introducing the necessary technologies in order to keep the technological edge, we keep the research, and so on. It could be a danger, I believe, for different armed forces within the alliance to develop at different speed. It's very difficult to keep up at the eastern flank when you need tanks and corvettes and so on. But in the same time, you need cyber defenses, you need the capability to use the space in your actions and so on. So it's very difficult to keep the pace with all the other armed forces. Also, the resources we have to invest there, we need to keep them balanced in investing them, because we need to think about industry also and rejuvenate the industrial base, but we also need to think about infrastructure, improving the living conditions of the soldiers, improving the recruitment and retention. Sometimes I think we wrongly believe that bringing new equipment, this will mean less spending, they will be cheaper to use them, less people working on them, but sometimes we find the opposite. This is why what we are doing in the alliance, and the fact that ACT keeps us on track and pushes us towards the digital backbone of the alliance, Diana, and all the other type of initiatives, I think they help us. Somehow, we lived in the mentality that the alliance required this for us, so we put more energy into doing what the alliance requires for us. We started to realize lately that we need to develop our own pillar also. We need to have our own initiatives, and everything we do should be adapted to the situation in our region. The fact the alliance is very much involved at the eastern flank, this is a good force multiplier for us, but also we pay attention in what we invest, and we try to invest in our people, we try to invest in hardware necessary for us, and we try to invest also in the industry, because without the support of industry, without them being able to provide us what we need in the long-term confrontation, then the chances are very low, and I see no resilience. And because we speak about resilience, maybe we should have a conversation about redundancy, because redundancy also helps us with the resilience. Too much we were focused on how efficient we can be, you know, when we can reduce the spending, and now we discover that probably it's better to have some redundancy in some of the areas. I don't know if I answered your question, but what we do there is pretty much in connection with what is going on within the alliance, and we try to have our own initiatives in the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will have the last question from Bucharest. Mr. Tudor Curtifan, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Tudor Curtifan. I'm a journalist. I'm editor-in-chief at Defense Romania. First of all, congratulations for the presentations and for this event. I have also a question for General Lavigne. How will technological innovation be integrated into the planning and implementation of NATO Instrument of Power 2040 to ensure alliances' military edge and the resilience into the face of threats like emerging threats and challenges? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So for me, the most important indication is the how. How are we going to integrate all this innovation in all the process we are working on? How to tackle the challenges of the future? So I think, and maybe I will repeat it. We know the what. Before the how, it's very important to know the what. And the what, how to tackle the challenge of the future is to, it's multi-domain and enabled by digital transformation. That will maintain us, our military edge. And the how now. How? Of course, it's very important to have the objectives, to have the path. So it's the top-down approach. It's the concept. With the concept, you align 31 nations, soon 32. And then the nations, as it was said, nations then can develop, innovate, not waiting that we are also innovating or developing, but nations are. I remind you that 95% of the capabilities in the alliance are developed by the nations. So it's good to have a goal, it's good to have a path. But now it's the how, and there is a sense of urgency. And the how is we need to have this agile approach that will bring sooner than in the past the necessary tools the warfighter needs to fight tonight. That's very important. Of course, we are thinking about tomorrow, but we have also to work on the tonight. And we are working on the tonight with ACO and ACT. And we are working on the tonight with all the nations. And it's through experimentation. It's through wargaming. It's through modeling and simulation. General Petrescu mentioned quantum, artificial intelligence, unmanned system, robotics. That's the emerging and disruptive technology. And sometimes when I hear emerging, I say, oh, it's not emerging. They are already emerging. So quantum encryption already there. Artificial intelligence. There are already some generative tools, ChatGPT. So we have to speed up. We have to create the framework, the condition, the environment where we can bring more private sector and when you were talking, Sir Larry, about logistic or sustainment, or we can think about when we are talking about returning to collective defense. If in my mind, but also in SACEUR mind, it's reinforcement, it's readiness, it's as General Petrescu say, infrastructure, it's energy, it's sustainment. So how to bring how to be better in these fields, for example, in logistics. And I must say, logistics, of course, it's national responsibility, but it's also collective responsibility, and we have to think logistics not only in peace environment, but also in contest environment. So, and of course, when you are thinking about COVID and how the big companies dealing with logistics have done to reorganize, they have developed a lot of tools for with this technology, with these emerging technologies. So it's so important for us in the defense sector to go and share with this private sector more and more. So the how is definitively agility, subsidiarity, bottom-up approach, innovation, experimentation, wargaming, etc., without forgetting the talents. General Petrescu talked about the recruitment, retaining. We have to have the mindset, the skills of this digital transformation bring to our people. So we are already working on new education courses on multi-domain, of course, and leveraging the knowledge on space, on quantum is essential. And if you want to have a sort of analogy, I can say that the current digital transformation of our C2 is very important. And multi-domain for this new C2 is like the smart grids to current electric grids. It will offer, of course, more agility, more reactivity, more evolutivity, and of course more resilience.
Thank you, General Lavigne. Thank you, General Petrescu. This concludes our first part of the event. Thank you, and I'd like to invite our speakers for the first session and the moderator to begin our first session of the panel. Thank you again.
Right, so welcome everyone here. Just a brief introduction of myself. I am Sasha Farba, journalist and also TV anchor at TVP World. And I think very much here today, I mean, there's so many issues that we have to navigate here, and I want to just jump on that right away and look at the semantics. We're navigating towards resilience. So this implies that this is a continuous journey. We haven't reached it fully, and perhaps we'll never reach it, but I think that's also really key here, that we try and address some of these issues here today. Also, I think the nature of this meeting here, connected through Bucharest, as well as Washington, D.C., looking very much at the core of how those signals are happening right now. We're connected here through those same cables under the water, through those same signals, addressing space, land, and the sea, which I think are very important themes here. I'm not hosting this here by myself. Of course, there's a wonderful host on the other side of the line who I also want to introduce. So as we're navigating here this journey, I'm navigating with my co-host, Mr. Patrick Tucker, who's a science and tech editor at Defense One, and he's going to in a moment introduce the panelists who are in Washington, D.C. But I have to say, first of all, many thanks to the whole efforts here down. I mean, I see this room is full with esteemed guests from all manner of industry and government. Special thanks as well, once again, to the Hudson Institute. Thanks for being a partner for this event, the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center, political research group as well. But I think first and foremost, the Romanian government and all of those involved. And we're sitting here in this absolutely gorgeous venue here, fantastic. And I think also depth is important. I mean, I've been here for the first time, just looking at the scale of this, and I've heard that the depth not just goes above, but also underneath. So again, we need to address that in our topic today of land, of sea, and also air and space. So without further ado, I want to introduce, in no particular order, first Mr. Romeo Milea, who's Network Development Director at Vodafone Romania. Welcome.
Thank you.
And then also here to my right, Patrick O'Neill, Chief Technology Officer at Black Sky. Thank you. and also Victor Venera, who is the General Director at ICI Bucharest.
Thank you very much.
But also we have, as I said, a panel in DC. So this is going to be, I think, also testing the new fronts of, as the General said, not just emerging, but already emerged technologies. We're going to bounce over now to DC. Patrick, could you just also introduce the panelists there who are with you?
Okay, thank you very much, Sasha. Hello to everyone here, hello to everyone online. Very happy to be a part of this important forum. It is kind of a fun new format and a sign perhaps of things to come as we deepen transatlantic collaboration, cooperation. So joining me here today, we have Larry Schutte, who now is at Lockheed and has a very fancy title. But I know him from his time at ONR, the Office of Naval Research, and he's one of our country's preeminent minds on autonomy in maritime environments for military, and not just the development, but also concepts, also developing strategy around autonomy in maritime environments. He's always been very generous with his time. And Brian Clark, who's here with Hudson and is led a long, distinguished career, one of our nation's most prolific writers on within the public space that you can actually read, and I encourage everyone to actually do it, on the subject of applying strategy, military strategy, to innovative and emerging technologies, and calling for adjustments in strategy where innovation and emerging technologies are breaking obsolete frameworks and paradigms. And I think that is so important right now as you watch literally, entire dossiers of well-made, well-thought-out war plans be tested and discarded on the fields of Ukraine as a small group of highly innovative people use everything at their disposal to work against the odds and create amazing defense capabilities against a much larger but also ideologically backward force. So with that, Sasha, I'll turn it back to you, and we'll just sort of like ping pong between us. I've got my phone here so I can keep up with you as you go. And as we get to about 15 minutes out, we want to hear from all of you. So make sure that you have some questions loaded up, and we'll go back to Sasha. Thanks.
Thanks for that. And also, I think, because just a logistical point, there'll be two sessions of this. So this first hour now, we started to dive into this topic in the second session as well. And of course, there's another esteemed gentleman that I neglected to mention, also to welcome here, Mr. Eres Koren, Intelligence, Space, and Cyber Directorate of FL Advanced Defense Systems. Also, welcome.
Hello to.
So, yeah, let's begin, because there are so many aspects here that I've heard, and mindset came up several times when I was listening to the opening, also about trust, industry. But I want to come back on the main fact, like these 19 months we've seen, I think a lot of that resilience that we've heard has been because of the war that's happening in Ukraine. And I think also this addresses also the first sort of question here, in terms of how, let's say, prepared we were, or how, we were not prepared for such a war. Now we're hearing continued resilience require many, many things. Industry to play along, society to play along. So looking now at the challenges right ahead and taking stock maybe and looking at the systems in place, and I think also I want to come back to the sea and the Black Sea in particular. We heard the report there from the General in Washington, and that we are very much here in Bucharest, part on the front lines. On the front lines of a war that shows no signs of abating. But that also goes, I think, I'd like to think, across the region, Central Eastern Europe, 3 seas, so from the Baltics down into the Mediterranean, here the Black Sea. And I think that is very significant, because I think the people here and those countries involved do see that and do feel in a different sense. So let me just address very firstly on my left here. I'll start with you, Romeo. Looking at technology, as we've seen it now, where do you see the biggest, let's say, bottlenecks of moving us forward so that we are resilient in this?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm representing the private sector, so we are building the critical infrastructure for the digital society. And we have a lot of collaborations with the authorities, and we start to work with the government to understand that the mobile and fixed infrastructure that we are building, it's also critical for the, not only for the peaceful time, but also for the crisis or, I don't know, different other situations as Ukraine was one of the learning. For us, I think the most important thing is the building of the future network, which requires a lot of investments. This is first thing. The second thing is related to cybersecurity. We need to build the network more strong than in the future, in the past, sorry. We have an advanced cybersecurity defense in our network. I can give you an example. We are seeing 5 billion attacks per year across the Vodafone footprint, not only in Romania. We have 70,000 events, cybersecurity events that we are treating across the Vodafone footprint. So being a critical infrastructure for future digital applications or utilizations, we are, let's say, in the focus of the hackers or the focus of the people that try to put down the network or to use the informations. Unfortunately, the people that we are offering the services are not seeing the cybersecurity as critical as we see. So there is a cost associated with this. There is a lot of investment in skills and people to keep up to date, to be ahead of hackers or ahead of people that are trying to use unauthorized the network. So therefore we are collaborating with authorities, or we try to influence the authorities to understand that critical infrastructure means also focus and some regulations and some help for the industry, not to pay only the final user, which don't understand today, understand only in the critical situations. For instance, if it's an earthquake, after the earthquake you understand that the building is quite important to be strong. But if it's nothing in the last 10 years, you forgot about this, so you are not willing to invest in the assurance. We know that the cybersecurity is critical, therefore we invest proactively, but this requires a lot of effort. And the cybersecurity is not only a topic of the hackers, it's a topic of being up to date, hardware and software, being with the vendor environment that are, let's say, close to our values. That's why there are a lot of discussions about banning some of the vendors. So it's a lot of effort to keep up to date these trends.
Thank you for that. And I think on the cybersecurity front, I think this is also going to be interesting, saying building out modern networks. Also, I think it's very much a war we don't see. Right? I mean, we don't hear it in the headlines as much. We don't hear, the public, as you said, is not aware of this. There was that danger at the beginning of this outset of the war back in February of last year, where we thought, well, with the Russian strike on critical infrastructure, and we've seen some of that. We've seen, I think, also the rise very much of actually the citizens going in actual defense by citizens, hacker warriors. We've seen that in terms of various things. But it hasn't scaled to the sense that we were afraid of. I don't know if that's probably a good thing. But as you said, it requires investment. It requires more attention. Cybersecurity is something that never sleeps. Also, commendable efforts, I think this is not mentioned enough, is that Ukraine has joined that special NATO network of cyber resilience there. And I think that's, it may not be a member state yet, but I think in the key of this component, this is really key. I'm curious also, bouncing it back now to DC, over to you there, Patrick, if what the, let's say, panel thinks of cybersecurity and, as we said, the challenges of investment here, will we go through that? What's the view there from DC?
Right. Well, yeah. Let's take that and let's apply also a new condition, because the war in Ukraine has highlighted, I think, obviously the importance of new best practices in terms of redundancy and cloud computing, etc. But the thing about autonomous systems is that the less communication that has to happen between a command center or even an operator and a platform, the less chance there is of a cyber incident. And that's one of the ways that autonomy is really proving its use here. But there's still that kind of trade-off that has to happen where operators are really critically important. So I'll ask you both your views on this. Where do you see the intersection of autonomy and the need for operator control in the future, particularly of these things that we're seeing in the Black Sea right now that are providing such force multipliers to Ukraine? Because that gets directly at this question of how much cyber insecurity can we handle in that environment. Go ahead, Larry.
I'll go first, and then Brian can correct me. It's interesting. I think Brian comes out of the submarine warfare community where they were trained to never communicate, and commander's intent was well understood. And I think that as we get more and more sophisticated autonomous systems, those systems will need less and less communication to have the same effect, which will have this cyber resiliency impact. And I think that's where the more compute power that you can put in a system, the more it can make analysis on the platform. So it's not sending back full frame video, it's sending back contact reports. The ability then to do low bandwidth comms, it makes it that much more secure, that much harder. But I think from a cyber defense perspective, in some ways we've been fortunate that over the last 30, 40 years, we've been reminded how important it is. Periodically it makes the news, but it's happening every day. And so they grudgingly are spending, the governments are spending money in these areas, the companies are spending money in these areas because we know we have to.
Yeah, and I get to add on what Larry has said, and Larry and I go way back, working together in the Navy. The two things I think that we're seeing in terms of trends are, one, it depends on how you build your tactics or your operational concepts. So you can build your concepts in a way that minimize the amount of communication you have to have with that uncrewed vehicle. And that's really critical because we can't have these robots off making decisions on their own as to who to engage, who to attack. So you have to construct the ConOps in a way that constrains what the bounds are for the vehicle to be a very strict set of criteria have to be met in order for you to attack a target. And if you don't meet those criteria, you're going to have to communicate back with me at home and make a decision. I'll have to make a decision about what to do. But then that brings into play, okay, well, is cybersecurity afforded when we make that communication? And that gets to the other dimension I wanted to bring up, which is a lot of what we're seeing in terms of cyber attacks today is what I would call radio frequency enabled cyber, meaning I'm using the radio frequency spectrum as the avenue or as the aperture that I'm using to attack your cyber system. Because a lot of military systems are now firewalled off from the broader internet. And you can see Russia and China both pursuing this as well. So increasingly, cybersecurity involves just keeping my RF signal from being intercepted or being able to be detected by an adversary. So if I can use directionality, or I can use a waveform, or I can use power levels. There's a lot of tools you can use or techniques you can use to minimize the detectability of your signal or the ability of your adversary to understand your signal. That right there is going to afford you cybersecurity without even having to worry about what specific information is being passed. Yeah. So I'm seeing those two big trends now as the ConOps and how we build the tactics to minimize the amount of communication. And then when we do have to communicate, how do we make it so that that RF signal is less likely to get detected and intercepted?
Okay, and I want to follow up on this real quick before I turn it back to Sasha, because it occurs to me that while you can minimize that communication between an operator and a platform, one of the big vulnerabilities or flaws or just shortcomings, if you will, of some of the really cool drones that we've seen Ukraine deploy in the Black Sea to hold at jeopardy the Russian Black Sea fleet is the need for GPS, right? And the need for navigation. And that can come in or out depending on how well your adversary is jamming your GPS downlink, or even depending on the whims of the owner of the SATCOM company that is currently affording you that capability. The Navy and the Army all have, U.S. Navy and Army, all have programs in position navigation and timing that is GPS independent, but it's not the sort of thing that's ever going to come out of the commercial sector because they have no need for it, it seems. So when you look at the future of naval autonomy, how do you get around that, especially if you're talking about partner nation capability in a place like the Black Sea?
There's been the kind of GPS independent navigation systems you're talking about are generally pretty expensive, right? They require an expensive inertial navigator. They require something that's going to do terrain mapping or something relatively sophisticated like that. The new trend I'm seeing is that you can use artificial intelligence to a degree to help a vehicle predict where it is. So it's not so much determining where it is with certainty based on the GPS signal or based on it sees a particular navigation aid. But it's combining all the information it does have. So it's combining what was the last thing I knew about where I am, and what's the terrain kind of look like here, and what is my visual picture, and maybe what are some signals I'm receiving from radio towers and cell towers in the area. And based on that and my understanding of this general environment, can I predict where I am using artificial intelligence? And that's the big trend I'm seeing now, which is a much cheaper way to go about doing your GPS independent navigation than to build some very expensive inertial navigator. And it might level the playing field so that we can have allies that don't have access to that high-end navigation technology be able to build systems and field them that use software to achieve nearly the same level of accuracy as you would get from an expensive inertial navigator.
Maybe another way to think about the same solution set is that commercial systems are typically designed for benign environments. Of course GPS is going to be there. Of course I'm going to have perfect communications. I'm designed for that. And as a cost saving, you assume that. Military systems have to come out of a red teaming environment where you assume the worst case. And so somewhere in between navigating off pulsars, which you can do, or satellite or star mapping, which we can do, all the way down to GPS, which is free, are the other satellite navigation constellations. There are at least 3 others that are up there. It's easy to buy a 4-band SATCOM or satellite navigation system. It's easy to create a poor person's inertial navigation system. And all of that is available, but you typically don't go there when you're trying to build the cheapest thing so you can make the most possible profit from it. I think what we're seeing in this conflict, ironically, is why mil-spec systems are valued and when they're valued. And if you want it to work all the time, 100% reliability, you pay for that. And you have to pay for it from the design up. And I think it's been fascinating to watch the use of these disposable quadcopters. And everything from that up to the larger systems are all in play in that airspace.
Yeah. Sasha, I'm going to turn it back to you because now we've opened it up a little bit more into autonomy, and I think that's a wonderful avenue that I'm very curious about in terms of your panelists.
Gotcha. And I think also keyword was mentioned at GPS signaling. I think that's really key. I think there's no better man here sitting on my right to address that a little bit. But on the note, what we just heard there as well, looking at what we've seen in these 19 months, looking at, I wanted to save space for a little bit later, but I guess that's also interconnected here now. And looking at autonomy and the things that you've observed now through these 19 months already, looking forward now into the future as well, and what's missing, what's the autonomy part of this as well? If we're looking at all the data that's required, looking at very much on the battlescape, what's going on there in terms of that for that's you, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you everyone for attending the panel today. I'm going to address this really in 2 ways. I work for a company called Black Sky. We launch and operate satellites. There's a large portion of autonomy that comes into play when we operate those satellites. We obviously don't have a person up there flying those satellites, so these systems are autonomous systems. But then also from the artificial intelligence front, there are still major gaps and challenges to being able to really deploy artificial intelligence at its full capability to the edge in theater. So starting on the satellite side, I think when you're talking about resilience, an important part of resilience is scale. How difficult is it to go from one to many? How long does that take? What are the resources that are required to do that? When you have a peaceful scenario, you may not need a lot of something. You may need it for exercises and testing. But when you exit that peaceful time, you may need a lot of something, and you may need a lot of it very, very fast, right? So when we're looking at how do you deploy a large constellation of satellites, autonomy was critical. It wasn't an option, it was absolutely necessary. We're a small company. We cannot have a team full of 200 people operating a mission operations center. So from day one, we were looking at how do you build resiliency and redundancy into space systems in particular. And there's a lot we can talk about when we get maybe into the space section where that resiliency becomes critical. But to do that, you have to be able to do things like secure your supply chain, understand where your key components are coming from and any threats that may be posed to those key systems. So that's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about, and certainly, if you all remember, over the past few years, there were semiconductor shortages, for example, and that has major impact across the space. That can drive some of the slowdown maybe in development of AI. AI relies heavily on semiconductors. And that really gets to the second part about how do you deploy autonomous systems at the edge using the latest artificial intelligence capability. So at Black Sky, we've deployed our target recognition software on board our satellites. But I will tell you, while that sounds very cool, it is not the exact same target recognition software that we use on the ground. And the reason for that is that modern artificial intelligence methods typically require a significant amount of computing. So when you are trying to get an answer solved by the latest and greatest technology, that may require sending your data back to a data center where it gets processed using a lot of compute, a lot of expensive compute. This expensive compute creates a potential risk, right? If that communication is severed, or if your data center is down, that can create issues with your resiliency and redundancy. So one area that technology really does need to progress before you're going to have extremely powerful AI in your toaster, for example, is the reduction in the compute required for AI to really perform effectively. There's a massive gap in what's possible on a cluster of high-performance GPUs and what's possible in a quadcopter, for example. So that is an important area of technology. I think you're going to see more and more research go into that. When you compare what ChatGPT can do against humans, keep in mind that the human brain operates on a lot less power than ChatGPT does. There's still a massive gulf there, and that has enormous implications for the proliferation of AI.
I think that also really segues into next. You mentioned there in terms of really how that autonomy requires a lot of computing power, looking at scale. Once again, I think that's the question now here to you then, Romeo, about how we're looking to how to secure those redundancies. I mean, on paper, as I said, all looks well and good. More and more autonomy, scalable in terms of satellites, more of these systems. But what if that does fail? And what kind of strategies can we employ for that? Are we doing enough in that regard? Because right now we're looking at these wonderful technologies that can do the world and promise the world. But again, limited by computation, limited by certain structures. So how do we fix that, Romeo?
Yes, I think at least in Vodafone, we, as other speakers said, it's not only the security, it's not only the resilience in general, it's also the business continuity and the redundancy of the systems. So we have the design of the network. It's built in a way that for certain risks that we have, power failure, fiber cuts, stuff like this, we have double, triple redundancy to limit the impact and to be able to restore whatever issues we have in a couple of hours. I mean, 1 day, 2 days, depends on the magnitude of the impact. On the other hand, there are new technologies that are helping us, like satellite communications, and we are looking as well to this as backup solutions for our customers in the different areas where you have limited coverage or the terrestrial coverage is down. There are a lot of companies that are providing, and we are working with those companies to provide direct communications on the normal standard phones, as well as using as a backhauling the satellite for our connectivity as a backup for the terrestrial fiber, terrestrial microwaves. So this is helping us to improve the redundancy. On the discussions about the consumptions, artificial intelligence, and the redundancy of the network, I think a lot of developments are ongoing to use the digital automation and artificial intelligence to replace some human effort, which is very critical in the disaster situation, to reconfigure the network, for instance, or to have a different approach in situations. So in this way, we are not using a lot of backup people with a lot of backup skills, so actually use technology for this kind of threats and situations. Again, coming back to the cybersecurity, for instance, it's quite easy to work with software with artificial intelligence on top and to stop the hackers, rather than using thousands of people to understand what's happened and why we have this kind of attacks. This is just an easy example.
Thank you for that. I think now we've mentioned and we've brought up the one of the magic buzzwords of artificial intelligence. I'm already struck by the fact that we've already placed a lot of trust in this application. I think that might be a bit premature as a journalist. I'd have to really push and challenge everyone here on that. Maybe that's one of the next sort of levels of conversation in DC as well, of is AI currently fit for form, and do we have, I mean, regulation can be another debate which will last many hours, but looking at the existing frameworks that we have, I mean, right now we're at the cusp of trying to formulate what AI can do, but is the regulation, let's say, is AI ready for the kind of scalability that we've mentioned here for military application? I think that's a nice little throw over to you now, to DC.
Thanks. Yeah, I always love the question of you know, when journalists ask whether or not we can trust AI, because a lot of people unfortunately trust AI more than they trust journalists these days. But that's not my fault or my problem necessarily. So that gets us, yes, into this question of different applications of AI within a Black Sea context, including things like tipping and queuing commanders as to like what's actually on the field, what the intelligence actually says. We're watching the development of these really robust generative AI new tools like ChatGPT, and we know that militaries are working on a version of that that's appropriate for them, where you have an actual data set that's somewhat trustworthy. Mentioned how AI can help different platforms discover new holes in communication that they can then use the same way that AI can help planes, jets find holes in the spectrum where they can send small communications. But how is AI going to change the dynamic that we currently see playing out in the Black Sea? And to Sasha's point, the United States military has an AI principles ethics list, but in terms of regulation, and something that might exist in the UN or anywhere else, that doesn't really exist. It's really up to every individual nation to figure out right now regulations for themselves. So are you worried about a regulatory framework emerging that could hinder capabilities for one party to a conflict but not the other? Or what are your concerns there in terms of emerging regulations and ethics, and how that might complicate that capability? Or should to anyone. Larry, go ahead.
We could camp on this for the next 3 days. But I would say first that there's a concept in coalition warfare that you can't surge trust. Mm-hmm. And I think I keep going back to that from the 1980s, that's so true. And I think that's the same with AI. Mm-hmm. Right? You are not going to suddenly decide you trust it. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to be using these systems and build a level of trust, understanding where the boundaries are of that system, where it works, where it doesn't work. And the only way to do that is to work with it. And so whether it's coalition warfare or taking care of your kids or AI, you can't surge that capacity. I am not worried about AI in the hands of warfighters that are following the international humanitarian laws of warfare. I think that we know in the U.S. how to operate in a lawful manner, and we will continue to do so. Where I see huge advantages with artificial intelligence, in particular the machine learning types of systems, where we now have human accuracy at machine scale. You know, we've gotten to the point now where with structured learning, where for those repetitive tasks, the machine is as good as a human in terms of accuracy and making mistakes, but does it at speed. And I would just point to Chris Ray at Stanford University for his work for the proof of that. I think that we are going to employ AI at various levels, and it'll be very helpful. And I like to use the OODA loop as a construct, you know, observe, orient, decide, act. Where in that loop are we going to get tremendous gains from AI, and where are they going to be, if you will, at the tactical level? And I think in the observe and orient and decide, there's a lot of benefit. And probably in the observe and orient is where it'll come first, and is coming. And we're getting huge benefits there. We're still making decisions. Humans are still making those decisions, and we'll continue to make most of those decisions. You know, the fuse of a torpedo that's not a human decision. You know, that's a machine makes that decision today, and will continue to make them. And then those, you know, kinetic and non-kinetic actions will eventually become more and more AI enabled. But I think as you loop through that loop at strategic and tactical levels, AI is going to hit every one of those at different rates. All of them require trust, whether it's a regulatory trust, or we were talking earlier about Weapons Safety Review Board. You know, is it we serve qualified? You know, will the Navy or the Army allow it to be used? And that's a level of trust that we still don't know. When is it good enough? But I think there's so much more we can work on that I'm not worried about getting to that point yet.
Yeah, and I agree with you know, what Larry's saying. I think the one thing to keep in mind, and something he brought up, was this idea of it's structured learning is what we're using in a lot of cases, for example, for image recognition. That, you know, so you've got a person in the loop helping to make the machine understand whether that's a truck or a car or a boat. And I think in a lot of these cases where we're applying artificial intelligence to military operations, it's in a way that's either structured learning. So there's people helping the machine understand what's right, what the right answer is. Or we're carefully bounding, you know, so it's an expert system that really is just a kind of rule-based algorithm that's going to come up with recommendations or actions, but it's going to be within a very tight set of bounds. And this gets to the computing power question earlier, is that, you know, a lot of the, you know, large language models are very open-ended, and they require a lot of compute power because they're basically going to search the entire data set and make a recommendations or a prediction from scratch every time as if it was a brand new world. Whereas I think in a lot of these military systems, we're trying to bound them in a way that reduces the amount of compute power that's needed, you know, when it's actually being applied, because it's already built a model that's, you know, structured around bounds that we've set. Like these target recognition models, or some of the decision-making models that we're using right now. Artificial intelligence is being used for command and control, where a system will propose courses of action to a commander. We see this in Ukraine already, but those courses of action are within a set of bounds that have already been defined, you know, by the operators when they set the system up. So it's not starting from scratch and looking at the whole world as a brand new place every time you ask it to solve a problem.
Okay, I want to, before I turn it back to Sasha, I want to present you with a little conundrum to that, though, in terms of especially the way I see this conflict emerging. So using small attributable drones, you can keep at jeopardy basically anything that Russia wants to park in Sevastopol, right? So what we're seeing now is the emergence of new gray zone tactics in the maritime environment, and that's also very applicable, certainly to anyone in Romania, but obviously also to anyone that is worried about the future of Taiwan, right? Where we're already seeing merchant vessels from China, for instance, last April, drop anchor in places that cut off communications, and they're merchant vessels. So this is a gray zone operation. Now, does it seem inevitable to you that that's the sort of thing we're going to see more of in the Black Sea? And then, do we, to go to your OODA loop question, Larry, do we have in place the right procedures to be able to respond quickly enough to that, while at the same time not potentially committing a grave error and creating targets out of basically, you know, Greek previously owned or Greek-sold fishing vessels that now are operating in this strange, ambiguous space that may or may not be threats? Are we prepared with AI for gray zone maritime warfare in the Black Sea, and for that matter, in the Taiwan Strait?
Well, so I'd say for one that this is an example of essentially, counter AI type of warfare that we're going to see more of. Can you use the predictive algorithm that's been built into the weapon system that you're facing? Can you use it against itself? Can you give it bad learning? Can you start to, can you either train it in a way that's going to be counterproductive, or can you exploit it, like the Russians have done there? I think, the ways around it are going to be, we're going to have people in the loop to help make the decision or help understand whether that algorithm is being gamed by the actions of your adversary. So gray zone warfare is going to have to be much more human intensive than maybe the faster pace that you might expect in a higher end conflict.
Well, I think about the self-driving cars in San Francisco that jam themselves into a hive, if you will, which tells me that they haven't figured it out either. I think that in all these cases of gray zone warfare, accidents are going to happen. There are going to be casualties, plenty to go around as people try to figure out, again, because you can't surge that knowledge. So until it occurs, we're not very good at it. And I think that I look at this in the Arabian Gulf with the Iranian boghommers coming out to U.S. vessels and coming inside our restricted zone. And yet we're very carefully not going to the next step. Someone is going to get hurt.
Yeah.
And it's going to be unfortunate for the first one or two, but we will figure it out, as I'm sure the Ukrainians and I'm sure the Taiwanese will figure it out. At some point, there's no more gray zone. The question is, how long does it take to go from this uncertainty era to, no, we're absolutely certain we know what we're going to do? And that period of indecision is going to be interesting times.
Interesting. Yeah, more terrifying, but interesting and terrifying. So, Sasha, I'll take that back to you in case some of your panelists have a thought on facing the gray zone future in the Black Sea or elsewhere.
Yeah, indeed. And I think also it's wise to hear from them here and get those perspectives. This gray zone, which I think is just one of the elements of looking at that. On this now over to you, Edis, if you want to come in on this. I know you have background on this. Are we prepared enough? Not just for, I think, gray zone tactics, and I think if we look also and scale that out, we mentioned here also earlier by the general who mentioned the attacks that are happening, the missiles that are striking here very close to the Romanian border, near the Danube ports. You go also to Poland, where I'm based. I mean, we still have incursions from, we had those helicopters come from Belarus. We've had those stray missiles as well. So, I mean, do we have let's say, the parameters in place? What's missing? And I think underpinning AI and all of that is also, I think, the talent and the infrastructure and the innovation, which we'll touch on more. But right now, do we have enough in place to guarantee security? And what's missing to move us to a level where we can counter all this, as the gentleman said in DC?
Try to be short. And my name is Eris from Rafael Defense Systems. I think if we look at the attacks that we have seen recently, so we see swarms coming over from different locations, usually low-cost ones. Try to enter to the head of the other side and think about their hesitations, what kind of payload to use. Is it a dual payload, one payload, and so on. For every attack, there is a solution. We'll not speak about all the solutions here, but definitely for every drone or UAV that is being thrown from the other side, there is a solution. Some of the ideas here definitely meet this type of solutions, but definitely the other side is preoccupied, is not on rest. Think about sending a payload of, let's say, just with a bomb, and then what about the camera? What about the communication channel? Everything could be disturbed, and basically not only the UAV reach the final destination, there's a solution for all kinds of attacks.
Thank you for that. And I think also, I want to move over quickly now to Patrick here in Bucharest as well. Looking at, because I mean, it's also about being prepared and looking at if we have the right parameters in place. How do you foresee it here, currently looking at the Black Sea? And if we can scale that out, and I think just one note on what you said about drones. I was speaking to someone in the Estonian defense industry there, and it's basically as soon as we deploy something in Ukraine, certain weapon systems that the Ukrainians are using, the Russians can counter that within about a week's time. So also looking at how we continue that sort of innovation wave just on the battlefield, but then also as a defensive.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really speaks to the speed of innovation and how do we stay in front of that, how do we react. I work in an industry that is very high-tech, but also very slow-moving in a lot of ways. Technology in the space sector can be very challenging because of the operating environment that you work in. So whenever you launch something new in the space that's never been tested before, that comes with risk. But in the sort of new space evolution that you've seen over the past 10 years, people are trying to practice this so-called agile aerospace where there is a little bit more risk that can come in. And part of that is because you're launching much less expensive satellites, so small sats, nanosats. They're not $500 million or $1 billion satellites that if a component fails, you really run into trouble. So what we've been able to see is we can actually rapidly respond to activity that we're seeing and to changes on the ground. So from a technology standpoint, even though I work in a relatively historically slow-moving industry, even our industry has started to really accelerate over the past 10 years. And you're seeing that by the different types of technology that are coming on board. So we launched our Generation 2 satellites not very long ago. We're going to be launching our Gen 3 satellites very soon. And that gives us the ability to change the technology that's on those satellites. We launch many satellites, so we're not just stuck with one design for the next decade, but we can really respond to what we're seeing. We have the ability to rapidly launch now. So as you're seeing across the industry, there are many launch providers, and these launch providers are providing a diversity of launch capabilities. So it's not just very large rockets launching very large satellites, but instead you're seeing small rockets and small launchers that are able to launch some of these nanosatellites, these small satellites, and they can launch them into specific orbits that may help with certain missions. So immediately shortly after the invasion of Ukraine, we were planning to launch some satellites into an orbit that would improve our revisit over the Eastern Asia region. We were able to rapidly adjust that orbit and launch that satellite into a better inclination that would improve our revisit over Ukraine and allow our customers and partners to access even more data than they would have previously if we did not adjust those orbits. That's not something that's typically done in our industry, right? You plan those launches very long in advance, and then you rely on them. We also have the ability to build a large number of satellites and then modify those designs, add new payloads based on the deterrence that may be occurring for what we're trying to observe. So adding that resiliency into the hardware is quite important. And then on the launch side, being able to launch things very quickly. So modify the hardware, modify the software, and then get new assets into space very fast is important. So we've been able to demonstrate this at Black Sky. We launched 6 satellites over the course of 21 days from 3 different launches, 2 different continents on two different launch providers. This is really not very common in our industry to launch that many satellites that quickly. And we were able to bring most of those satellites online within 12 hours, all of them within 24 hours, and able to deliver imagery and analytics and insights to our customers, all within that short amount of time using the latest technology that we were able to bring on that satellite.
I think also on that front with space, that's also something I want to touch on more in our second part of our session, also about launchers and nano satellites, because I think this is also going to be a really important role, but also maybe the limitations of that, because I think right now a lot of providers, in particular those nanosat providers in Europe and Poland, also in the Baltic states, they have excellent nanosatellites, but they're still relying on SpaceX and other providers. So I think we'll address that a little bit later. We're coming up on around sort of 15 minutes left here on this first part of our session. session. I'd love now to also, as Patrick alluded to earlier, open this up to some questions here from the audience. I want to start here in Bucharest. So looking around the room now, if there are any questions, just open that up here. Yeah? I think over here on my far left there, yeah. Just click the button.
Thank you. So, oh yeah, I'll try to
be comfortable.
Yeah, so I have a very sort of introductory knowledge on this topic because I'm just a second-year bachelor student of political science, but I realized something in these discussions, and we recognize the advancements that are made in the military-industrial complex in terms of aerospace and satellite production and launching, but when you think of the Eastern flank, we are just recently developing and investing in our militaries more than we did before with the invasion of Ukraine. How do you think that we can export those technologies fast enough and ensure the resiliency as well to the Eastern flank, considering the lack of capability that we have here on the Eastern flank of the, of the alliance? So I really want to get your input on if these things are discussed at the highest tables of decision making, how can we implement those quickly enough so in case of an attack we can actually contribute to the fighting and not just watch how the US has all these capabilities and we have to sit on the ground with a very sort of mechanical and old-fashioned capabilities that we have right now. Thank you.
Thanks for the question there. And I think this is an interesting point here about something I want to also address later with everyone is not just, of course, resilience through, of course, partnerships, which are vital, but also that industry, that homegrown industry. Also here, not just in Romania, but in, I think, the 3 Cs. And I think there's some interesting stories. So maybe let's bring it close to home. Let's start with you, Romeo, briefly about that. How do we get there? Is there potential for that kind of level of scalability, also growing those kind of industries here?
Yes, so actually as a potential, as a people, human potential here in Romania, we have a great potential actually. We in Vodafone, we have a lot of activities performed from Romania, from different countries in Europe. So there is also clearance and security for these people to work for different countries. There is also dedicated training and things like this. I think we have the potential from the people side. From the technology side, Romania was on the edge of developing the communication, the infrastructure communication. We have quite a great networks across the country with a lot of fiber, a lot of mobile, a lot of resiliency. We proved during the Ukraine crisis that we can develop faster coverage, for instance, at the borders or wherever the authorities requested, as we have also today a special request. So I think there is a lot of examples from the past, and I believe in the future we can faster adapt and help in this space.
Great. Also, I'm curious, Erez, I think I want to get your view on this now. Like, how do we move that also to this region and looking at the capabilities? And can we, I mean, partnerships aside, can this also thrive here in Romania and beyond?
So definitely. I think we spoke about data sharing, but also building here the resources to build new technologies. It should be one of the aims. And basically will make Romania be much more ready for any future surprises and attacks. We at Rafael, this is something that we do all over the world, and definitely we'll be more than happy to do it here in Romania.
I think in some ways you've already done it in Romania. It just comes to mind right now, UiPath, right? I think one of the big success stories, I know they've had the evaluation in the US, but that's homegrown, right? This started all right here, and I think there are probably many more of those stories that just need to be told more. I think that's also the ticket, right? Is that more attention needs to be on here. Now that the eyes of the world are on this region, and I think it's about also now sharing more. I want to open up to more questions also here in Bucharest. Just looking around the room, are there more questions? Okay, and perhaps there's a question or two also in DC, perhaps, Patrick.
Yeah, we do have one or two. Please go ahead, tell everybody who you are. And,
Great, thanks. My name is David Myers. I'm president of Ultisat. We're a satellite communications provider to the maritime, military, and humanitarian aid organizations. And on the topic of resiliency, we're increasingly seeing our maritime and commercial customers, humanitarian aid as well for that matter, adopt a concept in network architecture called PACE. You may be familiar with it, right? So you have a primary, an alternative, a contingency, and an emergency form of communications. But I think as both the generals mentioned in the opening remarks, one of the opportunities today is to be able to embrace both military communications and commercial communications as one network. And I guess my question for the panel is how resistant do you think the military ranks are going to be to adopting commercial as part of what historically have been siloed, bespoke, very secure networks? How well do you think they will adopt some of these commercial technologies, not as just a backup or an alternative route, but as part of an integrated network of networks?
And anyone in Bucharest that wants to take a stab at that too is more than welcome. Just I'll get a little signal here on my phone. So go ahead.
I think the U.S. Navy in particular is all in on commercial comms and commercial networks and is always looking at commercial technologies. It's a question of, will it work through a full mil-spec environment? But I do know that, when the ships come home to port, they tie into a network that's owned by the U.S. Navy. When they're at sea, they're using Starlink. And so at sea, they have 10 gigabit a second to the ship. When they get to the pier, they have 10 megabit a second. They're very happy with that 10 gigabyte a second to the ship.
Yeah, so I think the challenge then is how do you integrate those networks to be able to use them effectively? Because right now, when you go out to sea on a ship, you've got a Starlink terminal or maybe an Inmarsat terminal, Viasat terminal. They may or may not be integrated with your onboard communication network. So then, I'm sending messages off, and getting messages on this completely commercial network that's independent of my onboard network, and I'm having to figure out how to port things over and back. So one thing the Navy is doing with Project Overmatch is making it so some of that transition of communications between networks is more seamless. And I think that's going to be the focus. And getting to the discussion we had earlier about digital modernization, a lot of that has to do with how do I digitally integrate disparate systems that were not built to work together. And a lot of it has to happen by getting to the data layer, basically communicating and interoperating via the data layer instead of at the network layer necessarily. And so that's something that the U.S. Navy is focused on. To be able to take advantage of commercial communications. And I think what we're trying to do in the DoD is now figure out, does that have to be just at the user level that integration happens, or can we do some work to try to integrate the communications between military and commercial systems on orbit? Can they communicate with one another and use one to back up the other in a seamless way that the operator does not have to then hand tool at his point?
So that pace that you were talking about, you could imagine where the military systems are perhaps a primary today and the auxiliary is the commercial, but at some point, do they even know? Right? And it's that seamless integration that they're going after. But those, that takes time because you got to build that trust and you got to understand it, especially from a cyber defense perspective.
I think there was someone in Bucharest that had an answer to that question too.
Yeah, I think also we have one of our panelists. Patrick, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, so at Black Sky, we're really on the front lines of this integration piece, particularly with the U.S. government and other governments around the world. I don't think we've seen any indication that there's an unwillingness to work with commercial when it comes to the ISR capabilities that, for example, Black Sky can provide. As some of you may have seen last year, Black Sky was awarded a $1 billion contract from the National Reconnaissance Office, so that we believe is a really show of faith in what commercial can do. And from then, we've really been working pretty closely with both the U.S. and international governments on how we integrate better with their systems. So it's really important that we're not trying to build a system that everybody has to come to us and then we'll give you data. We want to be seamlessly integrated with our customers' existing user experiences, and we've built our system to do that. So we don't view ourselves as part of a stovepipe. We are we make it very easy for data to get out of our system and get into our system, and that's been a key part. So when you ask, why would, for example, the U.S. government, which has tremendous space capability, why would they look to a company like Black Sky? Well, there's a few reasons. One is our speed of innovation, being able to stay out in front of some of the trends in space. As I mentioned before, that can be a rather slow process, so we have the ability to experiment with lower stakes, test out new technology. So that's a key part. Expansion of capabilities is also really important. If you're familiar with how satellites work, you do not have persistence over any particular location. Instead, you have to image throughout the day when the satellite is available, and that creates gaps in your coverage. So if you're looking to have closer to persistence, have higher and higher revisit, leveraging a high revisit constellation like Black Skies that can achieve up to an hourly revisit per day, when you layer that on top of other capabilities, you're starting to get a higher and higher revisit cadence, and you're able to keep custody of what's happening even better. And finally, resiliency is a key part of it. So if you only have a few satellites, well, those are pretty quickly targets, right? If you have dozens of satellites across proliferated constellations that consist of commercial and national capability across multiple different commercial providers from different countries, that creates a much more resilient space architecture that is much harder to disrupt. So when you're looking at how do you build a resilient intelligence capability, it has to include both sides.
Interesting points there. I know there's going to be more follow-up on that, but I'm looking also at the times and conscious of that. And I think now is a wonderful time, both across the Atlantic and right here in Bucharest, take a little break. We'll now break for around 10 minutes and come back here. There's refreshments, hopefully also refreshments in DC, and we'll continue with the second part of this really captivating discussion. Thank you so much.
Almost already.
Okay, so we need 2 more minutes and everything will be set. Okay, I think we can begin now. Patrick, Sasha?
Ready to go? Yeah, welcome back everyone to round 2 of this discussion. Still more things to explore, but I think ultimately we could be here all night because there's so many intricacies here. This session will be slightly shorter. I think we've got about roughly 40-45 minutes for this. So let's jump right in. I want to start because we had during the break just a quick discussion here about looking at autonomous systems, focus on maritime technology. And I want to bring this over to you, Alice, because I think you were interested in this. So looking at this, what are the, let's say look at basically the pros and cons of implementing autonomous systems in maritime operations. And looking at, in terms of resilience, if we're looking at surveillance, monitoring, precision, so give us a little bit of your take on that.
So, hello again to everybody. So we are at the end of the day almost. So I want to say first about Rafael, we do from all the things that we spoke today, from UAVs to satellites, cybersecurity, and of course a lot of say fusion and the capability of doing a lot of AI and getting the data out of partial data. I would say the following: you need to have the full, let's say, package and to understand how to deal with what's going on today in the market. And I want to say the following: if you look at the pros, and I think it was mentioned here, but if we go over a short list, so definitely we have the 24/7 reduced risk to human on boats or out there. Of course, enhanced surveillance, wide coverage. We have many more operational capabilities. But then, if you look at the cons, we are basically adopting new technologies. Now, if we spoke about satellites, for instance, we know about new space, for instance. In the last 2 months, Elon Musk has lost more than 200 satellites. Imagine that, let's say, you were relying on, let's say, 100 of these satellites. So all of a sudden you have nothing, no communication, no surveillance, nothing. This is one example. And I think there are a lot of issues that has to be tackled in these new technologies. For instance, cybersecurity, definitely the rise of CPS, cyber physical systems, that currently are not protected, as the IT world or the OT world definitely has to be protected. In Rafael, we are tackling exactly this in a very tough way. And I think if you look also about the regulation, let's say we have a UAV, and all of a sudden the other side took down the UAV. Is this a declaration of war? Yes or no? So definitely the regulation has to be with common sense and apply to what's happening in the field. This is in a nutshell.
All right, and just also on that follow-up as well, I mean, looking at, we touched on it earlier about redundancies and looking at the technical sort of direction of that, like what can we do in that sense? Because there's more and more reliance on this, and if everything's autonomous, and looking at the redundancies and going in that direction, how do we prevent that in your mind?
So, in redundancy, I can give a few examples if we follow up how tough this is. I just from Israel, I can give an example that we had a UAV which we lost connection, and all of a sudden it crashed into a building. There was a spaceship called Bereshit in Israel, which was sent to the moon. It really almost reached the moon, and then the really last moments, there was one group who decided to activate an idle device. The other group who was doing the control didn't notice that, and it was too late. They shouted, "Hey, we're doing a reset." Until the reset finished, the spaceship crashed into the moon. And of course, we can learn from, let's say, the autonomous vehicles. I think everybody here heard about what happened in Arizona with Uber, where autonomous car ran over a poor lady who was crossing a road. And basically what happened there, that there was a woman driving. She was not driving, the car drove itself. And the group who did the coding basically decided that if there is a guy in the car, let's use only half a G of the brake, 1G brake instead of 1G. The car identified, let's say, the obstacle, the woman, but since he didn't have the ability to do the brake in 1G, he decided to run over the poor lady. So definitely sharing information between different industries, what's happening today in the market, I think it's kind of a chaos. We see different in the autonomous vehicles, like every company does its own system, and how many more people will have to die still, we'll have a combination of information. And I think if we look at what's happening in the market, at the Loyal Wingman, for instance, where we have the Tempest or the FCAS, or we have the Carrera project in the US, we see the combination of different countries coming together, joining forces, leveraging their knowledge into one system, which will be a breakthrough in the future. In Rafael, we're involved in all of these projects, especially in the unmanned devices and different solutions. I think with a really basic collaboration between countries, nations, will prevail and have this kind of an unmanned solution as soon as possible.
Great. I think you touched on a really interesting point there, is about looking at how we build out resilience. And I think we've mentioned some incredible technology. We've already picked up on AI, picked on autonomous vehicles, etc. And I think we've gone into a lot of detail, but I think I want to scale it back for a moment for everyone and look at how we get there. I think we get there by innovative talent, and how do we look at building these resilient networks, building these interesting technologies. So this mostly comes from deep tech, so everything from robotics, to mention drones just now, all kinds of things. We scale that to biotech, etc. So there's so many applications to this, and I think that the question now is, how do we build that, not just in the United States and elsewhere, but across the alliance? And of course, I want to put my focus here on Romania and the 3 Cs. I mean, there are certain examples. We already mentioned UiPath here from Romania. There's fantastic nano satellite company out of Lithuania. We have really interesting UAVs coming out of Estonia. So all these little ecosystems that are functioning, but I think we need more in that. So that's my question now. And we'll start, I think we need more of that research, and I think that's why, Victor, I'll bring that to you now here on this panel now, here in Bucharest. How do we build those kind of ecosystems. That requires, of course, investments, but is it something that can work here? Can we build these large-scale infrastructures that foster innovation, that can provide us with this deep technology that's needed for the future here in this part of the world?
Thank you for question. Yes, it's interesting. We build with people, and for have people trained in this, it's very difficult. But for this region, yes, we are good. We are good in cybersecurity. We are good in blockchain. We are good in innovative technology, and we build. I can tell from my experience, because National Institute for Research and Development and ITHC, it's an IT company. It's not a company, it's an institute. It's under coordination of the Romanian government through the General Secretary, and we start in 1970. It's 53 years already. And we train, we take a lot of fresh students, and now we have a lot of invention in blockchain, using blockchain application in communication, using blockchain for NFT, but not NFT like just a marketplace. Using NFT to get validation for documents, to get validation for information, to use like modality for cybersecurity. We are going to make forensic, digital forensic, not just in Web 2, we are going to Web 3 to make this digital forensic, and yes, we build with people, and I think it's better because it's a gap between region, between how good, not good, how good prepared are people between region, and it's a gap between chain of changing information. And it's better to have like an ecosystem, and to build an ecosystem, it's very difficult. It's very difficult because firstly you work with people, and after you work with technology. We start now to work with another ecosystem from Petrescu, it's BE development, and another from Estonia. And we are partnering in 3Cs initiative, and we propose some project using cloud computing and after hypercomputing like storage, and give services for SOC, Security Operational Center, together, because in this area of new technology it's difficult to innovate alone. You must be in connection, you have a network, and change this information and change how it's your problem to find how you can solve together with friends or allies, or find a new way to innovate.
You mentioned there with friends and allies, and I think one thing that comes to mind when you said research and talent, I'm thinking now of DARPA, for instance, in the United States, and that was responsible for a lot of the tech that we're using today very successfully. Many people, I think, in the public don't even know that. So I think with that, I'll bring it across the Atlantic as well, over to you, Patrick, and your audience and panel there, and looking at also how we could potentially look at the success of DARPA and how they see this maybe working out here in the 3Cs. I know the United States has been an investor into the 3Cs initiative, doesn't get that much attention as it deserves. So maybe that other view from the Atlantic and building these kind of innovation hubs here in the 3Cs and beyond. Over to you guys in DC.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very quickly, I just want to introduce my panel and have them introduce themselves. So we've got David, Winston, so let's tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll launch right into this.
Sure. Thanks, David Myers. I'm president of Ultisat. As mentioned earlier during one of the questions, we're a satellite communication service provider to government, to maritime, and really humanitarian relief kind of organizations. We're part of a much larger company called Speedcast. Speedcast is actually the largest provider of satellite communication services to the industrial maritime, oil field, cruise lines, and cargo shipping market. They have a global network of 20 teleports around the world. The ground infrastructure and provide services across 90 different satellites using the traditional geosynchronous satellite networks. In addition, they're also the world's largest commercial reseller of Starlink. So integrating both traditional, kind of tried and true, proven private geo networks and emerging LEO networks. And at Ultisat, we leverage all that to provide this kind of services to government.
Okay, and we also have joining us virtually Arnaud, right? Quick,
yes.
Who you are, what you do, please, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So my name's Arnie Dupuy. I'm with I'm a faculty member at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, working in energy operational curricular development. But I also wear another hat, which is chairing the NATO's Science and Technology Organization's SAS 183, SAS standing for Systems Analysis and Studies. And the focus there is looking at energy security and hybrid warfare. And we have a heavy maritime component to this, looking at the confluence of hybrid warfare and energy security in the Arctic, Baltic, and Black Seas. And so I'll be speaking from that perspective and looking at the game-changing technology. So again, very pleased to be here, and I'll pass it back to Patrick.
Okay, thank you. So on this question, very important question of the ecosystem, particularly around space and how diverse it is and how we can increase the diversity of it. And I think that cue to mention DARPA is so important because it was about 2 decades ago, DARPA found this little tiny old company and was like, hey, you know what, we really have to find places where the commercial sector can contribute to diversity in launch. There were some grants from them, there were some grants from NASA, and now you have SpaceX, basically, which owes a lot of its existence to DARPA. But one of the weird effects of that success is that SpaceX kind of has, depending on who you ask, a kind of a monopoly on launch. I'm told that the launch market is actually going to contract even further than it is. The US government has to have 2 launch providers, but one costs twice as much, so that's not really an option. Let me turn to you. What do you think right now of the ecosystem in terms of launch and space services? Do you perceive it as large enough, as diverse enough? And what can policymakers in particular do to improve on that diversity?
It's a great question, and I think from a launch perspective, you have to kind of step back and look at commercial space in general. And there have been a number of U.S. space policy changes over the last 20, 30 years that have enabled commercial space to become a reality. It's not just that DARPA looked and anointed a company and said, hey, we want to invest in you. It's that U.S. space policy changed, the Land Sensing Remote Act, or Remote Land Sensing Act was passed in the early 90s, which allowed companies in black sky space that we talked about earlier to start building private satellites for Earth observation purposes. Really, I think the ability to meet the need of government, to augment the government need with commercial space, has been the enabler for companies like SpaceX, like Rocket Labs, and others. And frankly, they have used sort of the commercial mantra of how do I do it more quickly, how do I do it more cost effectively as the driver. I mean, take SpaceX as an example, right? They're really one of the first, probably the only viable player that can reuse their launch vehicles. The traditional companies like United Launch Alliance and Air Launch and Sea Launch and those kinds of companies were dependent on single-use disposable solid rockets. SpaceX really pioneered using commercial sourced materials and building their own engines in order to reuse it. And I think at last count, they've had like 275 launches, 220 of them, they've successfully retrieved the first stage for the Falcon 9. And of those, 190 have been reused on subsequent launches. So they have taken the cost per kilogram down from $25,000 per kilogram 20 years ago to $9,000 per kilogram. And that's going to continue to happen. And it has been that lowering of the launch cost that has enabled startup companies in the Earth observation space, in the communication space, to put more satellites up. Because smaller computing platforms that have greater processing power don't weigh as much, and I can put multiple of those satellites in a LEO constellation and put multiple of those satellites in a single launch vehicle, put them on orbit. So I think the launch capacity is going to continue to grow. SpaceX is not the only company that's doing it. There's others. They get a lot of best press, though, because they're launching not only their commercial and their government customer spacecraft, but they're launching record numbers of satellites for Starlink. You know, there's 5,000 Starlink satellites up there. 20 years ago, when I started in this industry, there was maybe 400 or 500 commercial satellites in orbit. And now one company has, you know, multiple times. So I think it is sufficient, and it's going to continue to grow and be an effective way for government to leverage commercial launch.
Arnold, what do you think of this idea? Is the current ecosystem, in terms of launch, is it diverse enough, or do you see maybe a problem there that we're not dealing with, which is one player that just is the magnet for a lot of the innovation, a lot of the money?
I'm a little out of my depth talking about specifics in the in space launches and so on, but my take is, from my perspective, is there should be more competition, more capabilities in this area. Particularly bringing in the private sector was I think an excellent idea some years ago. But I think we also need to look at what some of our allies and partners are doing in this space, particularly in the EU and also in some of our Asian allies and partners. I think there's some excellent progress there, and I think the better that we can collaborate and develop these technologies and enhance the base of this is probably in everyone's best interest.
I want to stick with you for a second before I pass it back to Sasha, because one of the things that you do look at a lot is hybrid warfare and the evolution of hybrid warfare. And we were talking about that a little bit in our last session, and the possibility of, gray zone complications in the Black Sea and how that becomes the norm, as well as in the Taiwan Strait. And space assets obviously play a huge role in detecting and providing response options to hybrid warfare and gray zone warfare. They just increase the amount of intelligence anybody has to respond to and identify that activity. Where do you see, particularly in the Black Sea, hybrid warfare going? And do you feel like Western nations in the NATO alliance, do they have the capabilities they need to respond to it, or is there a gap?
Yeah, that's a great question. So regarding space systems and so on, I think the great example of this is the June 2017 spoofing event that happened in the Black Sea, which impacted maritime traffic for the better part of, I think, a couple of days, if I'm not mistaken. But that's an example of what can happen in the maritime space, particularly when we look at the vulnerability of space-based systems and how that can impact maritime security and maritime traffic. Regarding the broader question, I think there's a lot that can be done. And what I'm looking at in the NATO study that we're addressing is primarily all domains, I mean, not just maritime, but all the domains are so closely interrelated in the space that we look at resilience, capability improvement, and also interoperability. You know, the importance of being able to expand the mission base, you know, whether it's through air-based systems or through certainly through maritime defense and so on. And in this case, Romania has a very important role to play. So expanding resilience, that includes the infrastructure, whether it's the communications infrastructure, whether it's the energy infrastructure. I think this needs to be expanded to account for a larger potential NATO presence there. This will have the effect of not just expanding the security, but also certainly will enhance and expand the civilian infrastructure, which again, these go hand in hand, civilian and military infrastructures. And then the interoperability, the importance of having different militaries, different languages, people speaking different languages, having them work and being able to operate in as seamlessly as possible environment where you can share weapon systems, share doctrine, share different types of processes and procedures. And I think this is all through constant exercises, through constant interactions. Very much the venues that we're seeing right here today, these types of discussions, I think are critical to improving the overall resilience in the Black Sea region, in particular against the hybrid threat in this, or often called in this case the maritime gray zone, which we understand through technologies is in many cases getting murkier by the day.
Sasha, I'll turn it back to you and your folks' thoughts on any of that or anything else.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Yeah, we'll stay on that as well here with going into space one more time. The opening remarks, I know that General Lavigne said that we're not doing enough in terms of space, and that innovation as well. I mentioned that several times. Also, sharing is paramount in this direction. So with that, you've got some experience in this area. So I want to bring that over to you. Looking at specifically innovation on that horizon, looking at how that space innovation could potentially assist in terms of maritime resilience. Can you give us some examples?
So again, we can speak for a full day for that. I would like to tackle, let's say, only the issue of cybersecurity, for instance. We all heard what happened with the satellite of Viasat, which was attacked by the Russians, and from the satellite it reached the ground stations in numerous countries. If you look at satellites, they kind of represent almost the autonomous, or not the vehicles, like in 2008. A lot of them were not protected, there was no regulation for that. The world is changing, is absolutely changing, and the demand for cybersecurity for satellites is happening now to defend the satellite itself, with encryption, with key management, with zero-day attacks, with supply chain. And of course the communication channel with encryption, quantum encryption, and of course the ground station. Without this, I don't see a real validation of satellites to the maritime needs. And definitely this is something we have to tackle, all of us, if you don't want to see another Viasat.
Great, and also now over to Victor in terms of looking against space and research. We touched on hybrid warfare already, looking at the capabilities and the innovations present there. So what more can be done on your front here, what you're seeing, well, again, on that research and how we can move forward and finding that balance and also looking into hybrid warfare?
Yes, so space is a frontier, yes, it's like a startup starting. Our part of innovation, of research, it's more to go in part of communication and part of cybersecurity, not in build satellite, because it's not our job. It's our job now because we want to develop anti-UAV application. Now we build UAV to understand what is needed. And for satellite, it's just part of communication, to have like an internet, what it's in Ukraine now, Starlink, and in another part of the world, another network of satellite. But the gap are between how close you can be with this technology, starting from here, because I tell you it's a gap between region. And we work here in Romania with ROSA. ROSA is Romanian Space Agency, and we work in some programs with European Space Agency, but from our part, from National Institute, we work just in part of develop part of cybersecurity in communication, because a satellite is very vulnerable. You can attack, and you saw it's not just with genetic weapons. You can take the control and turn against your enemy. And in this part, in this sector, we can make innovation, and we make innovation. And in communication, we start a project if we can use quantic communication between a satellite and the center from the Earth.
Thanks for that. I also want to, there's more on these follow-ups. I want to get over to DC as well. One thing that I've also observed here is that we've talked a lot about partnership, about alliances, and that's key as well. But at the same time, I think looking broadly out, once this war began back in February of last year, Russia, has been a partner of the West in terms of space. Much of that has fallen away. So I want to hit this over to DC because we looked at a lot of partnerships. We're seeing more and more in terms of dissonance, in terms of space tech and also the space race. I mean, recently we have the Indians join that as well. The UAE also launching their own things into space, landing successfully with Israel as well. So how does DC perceive that? I mean, where are these partnerships? And I think, are we seeing a changing sort of the ecosystem? I want to touch on that a little bit before we close here. Over to you, Patrick.
It's a very tricky question for United States Space Command, which has found itself in the unexpected and fortunate position of being the traffic cop for all space. And I don't think that anyone, when they started that command, anticipated that. But it speaks to a great problem, which is exactly the inherent lack of security that might exist in space-based communications. GPS signal can be blocked. It can also be detected and actually used to target Starlink. Units that are running around using Starlink are actually visible targets. And the Viasat Act in particular also shows how our insecurity in space is as big as our reliance on it. So let me turn to you, David. In terms of securing, whether it's GPS signals, whether it's comms, what is the near future of that security paradigm? And speaking to allies and partners, is there an emerging a cross-partner consensus about what space comms security should look like in the next 5 to 10 years?
It's a great question. I think starting out kind of with the space race comment, when you hear that term, it conjures ideas of, NASA astronauts in, white short sleeve dress shirts with ties and, bespectacled glasses trying to solve, challenges to beat the Soviets. Today, it's more of a space Olympics because there's multiple events going on. You've got races going on in the Earth observation space, in the communication space, in the deep space exploration arena. So, and as was mentioned, a number of new countries that have entered the race. And in addition to now dozens of countries that have entered and wanted to become spacefaring nations, there are scores or maybe hundreds of private companies that have entered. And so the challenge is keeping track of it all, who is in what lead, in what role, in what subsector of the industry. The good news is all of those different competitors, especially in the commercial arena, provide more diversity, more opportunities to have alternate paths, alternate approaches. And so back to your question about what is the paradigm for resiliency in space, I'm a communications and networking guy, right? So when you design a network for resiliency, you're looking for redundancy and diversity in multiple paths in order to protect that network. So I don't think the answer is that there's going to be a new set of rules for cybersecurity that every company is going to adopt. Because as soon as you come up with a new set of cybersecurity rules and defenses, the adversaries find a way around it, right? So instead of trying to secure everybody with a set of common rules like ISO standards, the better way to do it is to have everybody take their own innovation, their own approach, and then when you build your network, you use that PACE architecture that I described before, which is you have a primary comms link that might be from one vendor or one type of technology, an alternate path that might be from a second one, a contingency from a third, and then an emergency comm that might be degraded. You may not be able to do all the things that you're used to doing, but you still have now at least 4 different paths. The key to success in doing that is embracing the concept of software-defined networking, where you're no longer stovepipe with, well, this is my network, and if it goes down, I'm going to turn a switch and move all my traffic to the backup network. That's kind of the old school circuit switch thinking way of building redundancy into a network. Today, orchestration platforms, network management platforms can say, all right, I have a primary link that's, let's say, a geo satellite. And I have an alternate link that's a LEO satellite, like Starlink or Viasat. And then I have a contingent one that maybe is Iridium or Inmarsat or something else. And instead of, just treating them one at a time and loading up the primary and failing over, you treat it as one network. You bond those different links together, and the end user may not even know which path their traffic is going over. As long as you've built it in a way that is secure and protects the integrity of the data for the end customer, you have the ability now to provide not only resiliency, but load balancing and a better user experience for the customer. And ultimately, you know, it is that multiple paths unified as one connectivity solution that provides the ongoing resiliency, as opposed to kind of one set of standards and security rules.
Okay, and I don't want to crowd out too much time because we are running quickly short to think, but Arnold, just super quick, your reaction to some of that in terms of the inherent insecurity of space communications, this resilient multi-layered approach, and how that might play a role in hybrid warfare. Super, super quick, and then we go back to Sasha.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a need for more players in the field, but the more you open this up, the more flexibility you have. You also have innumerable numbers of attack vectors. So this is sort of a double-edged sword where the technology and the competition and the players, on one hand, enhance the environment, but also provide potential vulnerabilities. I think that's, I'm not sure I have a solution to this, but I think it will require a greater vigilance on the part of certainly of the U.S. defense establishment, but also our allies and partners, making sure that we acknowledge that there are vulnerabilities in the overall environment, and do what we can to identify, deter, and then recover as best we can from these events.
Okay, Sasha, I'll turn it over to you to ask some final questions or reach out to the audience or whatever you want to do.
So I think at this point we've come to the end of this. I think we have more things to discuss here, and look at the time has already flown by. But I mean, already just a quick snapshot of looking at resilience, that opened up the debate about industry, about how looking at space and maritime technology, autonomous vehicles, touched on AI, so many, many, many things. I think each one of them can be its own panel. We can discuss it for many, many hours. But with that, I also want to close it. Really, really interesting. I think also the dynamics between this have been really interesting also as a co-host here. Well, my thanks to you, Patrick, over there in DC. I think this is a really fascinating format. But I think it's only really the beginning of all this. This is not a one-time box-ticking affair. I think this, as I've noticed as well, there's so many layers to this, and I think this should just only be here in Bucharest, over there in DC, and across really the alliance here, foster more discussion how this can go in smaller groups and more in terms of finding where that sweet spot is. Because as we said, we're navigating towards resilience, so that is a goal that we are not quite there, and even we shouldn't rest on our laurels once we get there. So without further ado, really fascinating stuff. Thank you to all of our panelists very much. So I just want to, before I say thanks, I think we have one quick comment here.
Yeah, I just want to take the role to thanks to everybody, and to thanks to you and to Patrick, because you moderated so well, and you did a very good job in challenging the speakers and in passing this through Washington and Bucharest. So huge thanks to you and to Patrick, and as well to the Hassan Institute that accepted in such a short notice to be our partner and to have such a great venue as the Palace of Parliament here in Romania. I won't go through all the topics that we have been speaking because it will take too long, and here everybody wants to go to dinner and in DC to the lunch. Just to say again, thanks to this center that organized everything, to the Vice President here, and to Carola and Valentin, who is in DC. It was an honor to work and a pleasure to work with you, and hope to have many, many others successful events. And I want to make an announcement that after this debate, we will publish a policy brief with all the ideas, because it was so many, so important, and we want to implement it. So thank you so much for this wonderful debate.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, so I think I won't add too much to that. Thank you very much, and just really briefly also behind the scenes to all, I think, the technical staff here. I think this would not have been possible without them. The unsung heroes behind the scenes, so also thank you, I appreciate that as well. So, and thank you all for coming here, joining us digitally. Thank you so much, but there's more tomorrow, so come back please. Thank you. Goodbye.